Thank you for staying all morning. I hope you've had much caffeine. I have tried to get our panelists this morning to have as much caffeine as possible, because panels are all more exciting if the participants are ready to be controversial. We have an interesting array of speakers here, and I've asked them each to introduce themselves as briefly as humanly possible. So maybe we could start with Frederick. You could introduce yourself.
So, hello everyone, Frederick Aatz from Microsoft. But today you should also see me as a OSPO Alliance member representing a couple of the V team here. Woo!
And you?
Hello everyone, I'm Jacob Green. I'm from OSPO and the Institutes of Applied Open Source. And my area of expertise is open source program offices outside of industry.
Perfect. Gilles?
Hello all.
Round of applause as well.
Hello all, I'm François. I represent the MAIF open source initiative.
Hello everybody. I'm Gilles Rouvier. I'm a lawyer in Paris since 25 years and specialize in IT, and particularly specialize in open source license and implementation of OSPO. I'm also president of an association named CyberLex, regarding which takes care of a subject regarding IT and law.
Perfect, thank you. And I'm Simon Phipps. I at the moment work for the Open Source Initiative, but back in deep history, I started, or I ran one of the industry's first open source program offices back in 2004, and since then have done other things. I have some questions for these good OSPO experts that we have here. The first question that I'd like to ask the group is, if you were starting an open source program office in an organization today, where would be the best place to start finding case studies, blueprints, and general information that you can adapt to get started with? Where would be the best place to start? Frederick?
So I'll jump in. The best place to start would be on the OSPO Alliance website and check in the Good Governance Initiative. So my peer members, we've worked, we've gathered a couple of experts, tried to gather a framework that would help you assess and probably measure as well your open source strategy and open source activities to kind of get further into the and you got the a sample here.
Yep.
So yeah, please check the Good Governance Initiative that was born incubated as part of OW2. It's part of OSPO Alliance now project, and we've tried to make it really practical with a couple of indicators to kind of track down your progress against it.
So there's a mic there, Jacob. Does that work for you? Is that the best place to go?
I'm from the OSPO group, and we also have a guide for creating how to start a OSPO in a university context. What I would say is that there are a number of different resources out there, that an open source program office in general depends on your industry, your context, and what you're trying to achieve. There are guides, there are and resources available. That does not replace the idea of talking to people in your industry. That is no two OSPOs are created the same. It is an individualized process, and I think it takes communications with each other to really feel where to put it.
Is that where you'd start, François?
Not really. I think OSPO is here to drive an open source initiative in a company. But an open source initiative, at the beginning, it's just like line of code. Donc, it must start with line of code. You write line, you share it, and after you can build your own organization around on that. And this organization have to reflect your DNA, who you are. And after, when you have gone enough, you can look for advice with OSPO guide.
Okay. I don't have the same view. Also, as a lawyer and external counsel, first I would ask to meet the CEO and the CTO and ask them what is their project exactly. And then once we have shared some views and following what the pursuant on a based on what they have decided, I would perform an audit, a due diligence on the open source, regarding the open source existing in the company. And then we would try to implement policies, a committee regarding the open source, the governance of the open source, and then at the same time communicate a lot with the people, with the employees of the company in order to have an adherence to the whole project. And then that's the way I would do it.
Frederick, I can see you gagging.
Yeah, I guess that's where we kind of disagree slightly. Is it like a line of code type of approach? I kind of agree and I kind of disagree. Is it a legal aspect? I think driving an OSPO and thinking about open source strategy is more of a, how do I change? How do I revisit my strategy in the company? It could be legally driven, technically driven, but it's also a change. It's really a change and how deep you involve your open source strategy in the company.
I agree with you, but just I think you have to have a very broad approach, technically, legally, and communicate with the people. But first, you have to know what is inside the house. And so you have to ask for the BOM, for example, the bill of material, and see what is inside the house. And then you can decide.
And OSPO is useful to spread all over the company the philosophy of open source. But if you overthinking the organization early, you just add meetings and meetings and meetings, and you do nothing.
So I'm going to take a slightly different way of looking at an OSPO. Conceptually, I see an OSPO as an organizational construct. It's like the office of the CTO. No two offices of the CTO are the exact same. The office of the CTO is there to help with the missions and the policy priorities of the organization. I look at it both in terms of being the internal policy priorities of the organization, whether that be about code, collaboration, et cetera, or whether that be about external engagement for that organization. For me, an OSPO, typically, I like to think of it as a pie chart, a circle. 50% of it needs to be about capacity to do open source, the noun, the verb, the community, the code. 50% of it I think of as the organizational API. A brand new organizational API that speaks the language of cooperation, that is your first point of contact to that organization when you want to do large-scale cooperations. That at least is the potential, and that's what we're seeing to some degree in terms of what naturally occurs in OSPO Alliance members, in terms of working with each other, between to-do group members working with each other, and globally, OSPOs tend to be very collaborative with each other, and that's the way I think of them.
So structurally, what is the best place for an OSPO to link into an organization? Should an OSPO be part of the CTO office? Should it report into the chief executive officer? Should it report into marketing, as quite a few seem to? Should it report into the engineering group that is doing the open source work? Where is the place that an OSPO should anchor into a corporation?
We see a lot, and François might jump on it, but we see a lot within the CTO office or the CIO. I would argue that wherever it sits, it needs to be connected to all the organization, whether it be HR, finance, legal, engineering, and business, to make sure that they are empowered to go across the organization.
Right. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I agree. Once you have the committee with a lot of people from all the side of the company, then the committee has to report to the CEO and the CTO, I think, because at the end of the day, you always have to have someone deciding, taking a decision.
Jacob, does that work in organizations that aren't for-profit companies?
I think we're at a greenfield situation for organizations outside of industry where we're still figuring out, and there are patterns that we see in terms of where an OSPO is placed that's all over the map. We're looking at federated OSPOs in some of the nation-state governments. We are looking at, for example, the European Commission is moving its OSPO into the interoperability unit. at Johns Hopkins, due to political reasons and other reasons, we put it at the library because it's seen as a neutral home and a service organizations for all the other 10 divisions. Where to place the OSPO is an interesting thing. I think one common thing we've heard of is it has to be authentic. So 10 marketing departments alone tend to not work. Sorry. And it also has to be empowered to have the authority. And so I think there's a common thread across the board to say you at least have to have the authority to get things done, whether that's the CTO, the president, or the chancellor, or whoever you have.
So I've heard a lot of people who are trying to put together an OSPO of what's something they're going to call an OSPO. Who should they hire to lead that OSPO? Now, what skills are they looking for? Are they looking for a lawyer? Are they looking for somebody who does community politics, is a community manager? Are they looking for somebody, a marketeer who can protect their brand? Are they looking for a people manager who can look after a large team of people who do the real work? Who should they be hiring? Do you have any ideas?
I think we are speaking about technical things. OSPO mustn't be disconnected from IT, from technical collaborators. If you find a manager who came from a technical, who have technical background, if he is comfortable to speak, to convince other collaborators, if he knows truly trust the open source philosophy, I think it's a good guy.
Yeah, I'd say at a high level, it would be a manager because he needs to be empowered, a communicator because they need to kind of connect dots, and someone knowing about open source, obviously, some of the legal aspects, some of the human aspects, some of the strategy related to the enterprise. So a leader or a connector.
Yes.
That's his.
Yes.
I think the connector point is for me. All of these things are valid. They need to have legal experience. They can't be divorced from the technical aspects. It needs to be able to project manage and keep lots of details. A connector for me is key. An individual that naturally can connect groups and organizations externally and internally. An anecdote I heard recently was nascent OSPOs that get started. At least outside of industry, what we've seen is they have to reformulate every 3 to 4 months. They're still figuring out what they're doing. It was described as almost like an entrepreneurial process, and so I might look at someone with a little bit of entrepreneurial background that can dance, weave, and jump a little bit more.
It's not easy to find a person who has so many skills.
Very difficult.
Very difficult.
Easy.
So what we did when we implemented OSPO for our clients, large organization, we implemented committee with no OSPO leader. I mean, the committee is made of many people, legal, HR, technical, and they all discuss together, and then they report to the CEO and the CTO, who's the last one deciding. But I think it's very important to have this broad approach and not only one leader, in my sense.
Yeah, the danger of one leader is it might be when do you kill the OSPO? I would say, is it related to the leader or is it and I mean it. I've always worked towards killing my own job, which would mean that open source is everywhere in the company, in HR, in legal. Everybody has an understanding. The downside is, when you have a leader, it's also a voice externally and represent. Well, I'm marketing, so it's good to have a leader carrying the message within the company and outside the company. So it's kind of balance.
One point I will add in there: in open source, we think a lot about mentorships. I think the job of an OSPO, we have a mentorship job there too. Yep.
To step out of role for a moment, so the OSPO that I ran, we had a team of about 6 people. Is that a typical size? About 6 people?
Depends on the size of the company.
So we had a team of about 6 people, and I had a mix of roles. And typically, the person who was seen as the leader of the OSPO in various aspects of the company was the person who had the skills that were necessary. So if it was a legal question, it would have been the legal person on the team that did it. But when it came to going to the CEO's office, I did that. And so I wonder whether you're both right, whether what you need is a cross-functional team, but you also need somebody who can speak up for open source when the time comes for a single person to do that. Do you think that's plausible?
I would refer back to the Good Governance Initiative. We have 5 goals. And I guess in assessing your own organization, you can weight the importance of the different goals. It could be very close to engineering usage and deep into the product. It could be at the exec level. So that could be influencing the place where, or the people that would represent the OSPO at some stage.
I think there's a difference also in the way the OSPO starts. Is it a grassroots inside the organization? Is there a champion that's really pushing it? Or is it a top-down decision that says we need to get an OSPO and therefore how would we go hire it? I think there's some differences there, and those should be respected.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it's interesting, Frederick, you were talking about getting rid of the OSPO as your final objective. So I'm old enough to remember when the big thing in IT was continuous quality improvement. And every corporation had a quality department who did all the quality. And then people began to ask the question whether, with all the quality in the quality department, there is no quality in the products anymore. And so they got rid of the quality department because now they wanted every product group to do the quality improvement. Is there any long-term value to OSPOs as a concept, or are they just today's quality departments?
We don't know. I would say, how long will it be before open source is just mainstream in the organizations? So
already is.
It is not. Let me disagree with that. Software is everywhere. Open source is everywhere. It is not everywhere in the organizations.
Right.
And that's where the governance as a whole is really a topic, and clearly the North Star of killing OSPOs is probably not realistic today. We need to start building them first, but then at some stage when the strategy is completely ingested in the companies, it should disappear because everybody is aware and is knowledgeable about what they should be doing as part of the strategy in the organization when it comes to open source.
I agree. The day OSPO become useless, we win. But today, you still find the data store expert who thinks that Oracle is more powerful than PostgreSQL just because you pay it you pay the cost. Mm-hmm. So the road is long.
I'm gonna say that we're not gonna have OSPOs disappear, that there is longer term value in them in terms of what are you trying to achieve as your mission priorities. I'll give the example of in academia, when we look at the 4 mission priorities. How can open source help education from experiential learning? That's something that's not gonna go away. You need an office to help facilitate that long term, in my opinion. The other mission priority is open science and looking at it in terms of the research output of that university, keeping that research output where open source is a research data output, keeping that at the top quality ends up also being a function that's not going to go away. Even if we get open source everywhere within all developers, that's not going away. So there's a lot of functions in terms of building collaborations and being that gateway for that organization to work with others. That's not going away from what I've seen. Those are the longer term values that I think why OSPOs will stick around.
I don't see why you have to kill the OSPO. I mean, OSPO is a good thing, and I think it impacts the value of the company, the value of the service, the value of the service. You were talking about the quality. Quality is linked to the value, and the value of what is produced by the company is linked to the IP rights. And the OSPO, the main purpose is really to, well, in my view, one of the main purposes is to deal with the IP issue and to educate people regarding what they can do with the license or not. So that's a long-term value for the company, in my sense.
Let me switch back. So I agree, somehow I agree, obviously I'm provocating in terms of OSPO, but is OSPO the bigger, the better in the company? So the OSPO team growing and growing and growing, is it a good KPI?
I wouldn't say that it has to be too big. I mean, you don't have to block people by something too administrative or too big. You have to provide the developers, the employees with education, with trainings, with tools, decision trees and things like that to help them, to assist them. So the bigger is not the better. I mean, something small and very efficient is good with expert, a broad branch of expert.
So I'm vaguely concerned by you talking about the value of the company's IP and you're kind of leading into compliance aspects there. I've a few times seen OSPOs set up to do the compliance enforcement for the company, and my understanding of open source is that it's all about removing barriers to innovation for developers. It is about having standardized licenses. It is about having open access to the code, no gatekeepers. And an OSPO seems to just be setting up a gatekeeper to stop people being productive. Isn't there a conflict there between those two roles?
That's not the way we did it when we did OSPO when we implemented OSPO for clients. We really tried to set up something which would help the developers propagate the information all through the companies regarding, legally speaking, I mean, I'm a legal guy, so I have the legal approach, but regarding, legally speaking, what it means an open source license. Why is there a license with a purpose for business, and why is there copyleft license? And what is the downside of a copyleft license when you use it in a product which is produced by the company, and how it can impact the value of the service or the product of the company. So it's really a kind of question of communication regarding open source and implementation of some rules, but not blocking people, just trying to give them tools and help them, the developers, the employees, to do better quality for the company and then the value of the company.
Yeah, I completely agree. It's all about leveling, taking out any barriers to the business, to the developers, to the hiring, and so forth. So the OSPO should be kind of a shepherd to define rules. It's all about up to there you can go. You're educated. There's the way to go. Those are the levels of business rules, legal rules, and so forth that you can comply with. And Mr. or Mrs. Developer, go for it. Mr. and Mrs. Business, go for it. And defining the level of no, you be careful there. That might be an issue. That would be the kind of the OSPO North Star as well.
Right. It's really a question of the difference between the gatekeeper and the guy who says always no, or the committee or the OSPO who says always no, we can do that, and the guy who comes, or the committee who comes and say we're going to help the business. We're providing solution provider, and the OSPO, in my sense, should be a solution provider for the developers.
So I think the journey we took Sans OSPO on, we started out doing a lot of compliance work, and we realized that the developers hated having to go and ask permission to use something under a license that wasn't already on our list, and that made them not use code because developers are very much people who want to get on with their work and not have to ask lawyers or managers for permission. And so one of the things we did was we created a process where generally you didn't need to do anything. there was a list of things that didn't require permission, and that steered people into certain behaviours. Do you think that's a worthwhile approach, or are there risks of having white lists?
No, I mean people should be responsible, and I mean the more you educate them, the better they are. And decision tree, you know, this kind of scam where you have if this is this kind of license, you can use it very easily. It's for business purpose. If it's a GPL2, you have to be careful if you distribute it or not. All this kind of information with decision tree is good for developers and employees. It helps them very, very much.
So, Francois, I know that you're very much a code focused or code led in OSPOs. Do you feel that OSPOs are just gatekeepers to stop developers succeeding?
I think an OSPO have to make easier a contribution, a use of open source software for anybody in the company, and it's here to allow you to avoid hierarchical validation, legal validation, because OSPO takes the responsibility of this. We are here to help developers to code, to code very, very well. It's simple. We are here to help developers.
Okay. So
I think MAIF is doing something that is pretty well, and that is part of the good governance initiative, which is also, we're talking about internal the company. There's also the outside community engagement that is very important, and that OSPO could help drive in terms of quality of code and so forth. That's part of the work we've done in the GGI, and I think you're doing a great layer there.
How do you feel about, so going off script here, so recently we've heard both Google and Red Hat have laid off lots of people from their OSPOs. They appear to basically be cutting the connection with community in what they're doing and just focusing on process. Do you think that's a good move? Is that a stage of maturity? Is it false economy? What do you think, Jacob?
I think there's a shift going on. And I can't speak to, industry is making a shift there. I think they are removing some of the community aspects of it. And I think it's governments, academia, and the NGO space. Their time is now in terms of open source. That's where I think the next frontier is. So as the large industry backs off, it is, we're seeing a lot of community focus, a tremendous amount of community focus in the other sectors.
Yeah, I couldn't talk for the other guys, but I guess that there's a different level of maturity between the software providers when it comes to ingesting and feeding back that we are not finding in large organizations, because that's the topic today. So I don't know for those we are not firing our OSPO team. Maybe still needed. We still have progress to do. But I guess that might be a good thing, because then the large organization can hire those guys.
I think attracting people with talent in open source knowledge is very, very important. And I've seen a client who did proprietary software. It's in finance. They did proprietary software for years, and they decided to go to open source on some of the software just to attract people. So if Google or other company fire people from OSPO, I think it's not a good sign for the community. I mean, OSPO is really linked to the governance of open source and saying that they're complying with some rules. And so I think to attract people, you have to show that you are organized and that you take care of open source. So for me, it's not good to fire people of open source, of OSPO.
You could argue that a lot of the open source developers are already hired, so you don't need an OSPO to drive this. People can kind of hire their peers, because they can say, it's working well here, so come. So it's kind of mixed feeling.
As we look at some of the policy level, if we can bring it up to that level, you see Open Forum Europe and others advocating, and some of the things that they're projecting out is open source is key for Europe to solve some of its greatest challenges. I think there's a talent pool, and we need to put that talent pool of open source to work towards that.
I think that's a fine final word. We have a line of red zeros on the clock in front. So I'd like to thank the panel, to Gilles, to Francois, to Jacob, and to Frederick. And thank you very much for staying here and not going and drinking coffee while we've been speaking. We appreciate that. Thank you.